Military, what happened to you in the war that you were never able to tell anyone about? This is an incident I will always remember. In 2010, northwest of Sangin, Afghanistan, I was a combat medic in a group with 4 Marines who specialized in dispatching airstrikes. Guys had to call in air reinforcements if anything happened. We supported the Georgian military as they built a new patrol base and set up camp with our trucks while the bulldozers finished building the walls and filled the gabion with sand. Sometime around noon on the second day, we heard an explosion and saw a large cloud of smoke from afar. We turned on the radio to see if there were any Allied units in the area, but there were no coalition forces nearby. We got in the car and drove to see for ourselves. As we approached the area, we saw the figures of 2 adults running around a van that had apparently hit a homemade mine. As we approached, we saw that it was a 6-seater Afghan van that had actually been hit by a mine. The van was destroyed, charred, and the engine was on fire. When we got out of the car, 2 adult men ran up to us, which scared us because they could have been insurgents. But we had an interpreter with us who explained that they were brothers to each other and asked for our help because their sisters were in the truck when it hit the mine. We ran up to the van and saw that there was smoke coming from inside. But when we got to the back door, we heard one of the women still screaming inside. As we opened the door and looked inside, we saw something that I will never be able to forget. The interior was charred, smoke was billowing, and what was left of the 4 women were on the seats. 3 had been torn apart by the blast, their limbs and body parts scattered all over the cabin. The 4th was still holding the severed arm of one of the sisters, and her other arm was pressed against her side. The blast ripped her left leg down to her pelvis. She tried to scream but soon lost consciousness because she was bleeding profusely. We pulled her out and I tried to stop the bleeding, but after about 15 minutes, she stopped breathing. I and the Marines gathered what was left of the other women so the brothers could bury them. To hell with Afghanistan. After reading my story, you might think I'm an asshole, but what happened is what happened, even though I didn't tell anyone about it. I was in Iraq for 7 months, in charge of convoy security. We traveled all over the country, delivering food and people to wherever we were sent. Very often, all the children from the small villages would run out into the street and run alongside the convoy, begging us for muffins or sodas, anything at all they could get. At first, we kept throwing them all sorts of goodies. It was nice to see their smiles after they caught something. We felt like Santa Claus and thought we were winning their hearts and minds this way, keeping them from turning into our enemies. It would have been nice to win the war not with guns, but with muffins. But of course, that was impossible. Another unit had an accident while handing out candy. After that, a new rule was enacted forbidding children from throwing anything at us while they were running around cars while driving in populated areas. They continued to run around us. Their attempts to ask us for anything became even more desperate. Anyway, one day, we were driving through town at an excruciatingly low speed. There were reports of improvised explosive devices being found in the area, and on top of that, the locals were lined up along the road, so we tried to drive as carefully as possible to avoid putting anyone in danger. As I surveyed the road and the people around, I noticed an adorable little girl hiding behind her father's legs and looking at us with her big green eyes. She must have been 4 or 5 years old. I knew we had no right to give them anything, but my heart melted, so I handed our spotter a muffin and asked him to pass it to the little girl, which he did. Her father had a big smile on his face and waved his hand in appreciation. The little girl, excited about getting a muffin, ran across the street to another group of kids to show off her goodie, and then some kid just shoved her and snatched the muffin out of her hands. Everyone in our car was furious. I was furious. The girl hit tears, sitting in the dirt without her muffin. As we approached that group of kids, I handed the spotter my urine bottle, the soda bottle I peed in on the road because we weren't allowed to stop even to relieve ourselves during the missions, and told him to give it to the same boy. It couldn't have been better. As we neared this group, he turned to the trucks with his mouth full of muffin and started waving, begging for something, and we complied with his request. He squeezed away from the other kids who were trying to take away his bottle. He was bigger than all of them, so it wasn't hard for him. We saw him open the bottle as he ran away and take a big gulp, then spit it out abruptly and threw the bottle on the ground. As we drove past him, he stood leaning over, spitting and breathing heavily as we drove away. There was an Iraqi man lying on the ground with half of his body covered by a blanket. We shot him. I saw a pack of cigarettes lying in his shirt pocket. I remember bending down and pulling it out to hand out to the guys. I even gave some cigarettes to the prisoners we were guarding at the time. It was one of the creepiest moments. I can imagine how creepy it must be when your body is lying on the ground and some guy comes up and takes your pack of cigarettes from your shirt pocket. You get up one morning, just like any other day, put your cigarettes in your jacket pocket, and go outside on your own business. You die, and some foreigner takes your cigarettes, as if that's the way it should be, while your body decomposes in the scorching sun. Creepy. I haven't talked about it before, and I'm not likely to tell you about it in the future. While patrolling a convoy in Afghanistan, one of our vehicles exploded on an improvised mine. My best friend was thrown about a meter away from the site of the explosion, a piece of metal embedded in his chest. Half of his face was gone. I'll never forget it. I recognized him from the surviving half of his face. The other half was a charred skull. He died in my arms. About 2 years after that, I finally returned to the States and met his family. They said he wrote to them every day, and when his letters stopped coming, they realized he was gone. His 5-year-old daughter asked me how her daddy had died. I didn't know how to answer her.